Okay, there we go. Are we all set? Welcome, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. Mr. Miller. Hi. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gallagher?
Here.
Ms. Baker? Here. Mr. Tuma? Mr. Tuma is absent at the moment. Mr. Hairston?
Here.
Ms. Conwell? Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. We have a quorum. Let the record reflect that Ms. Simon and Mr. Miller are also in attendance.
Welcome, Ms. Simon and Mr. Miller. Public comment related to the agenda.
Yes, Mr. Daniels?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Gallagher, Vice Chair Baker, and members of the Cuyahoga County Public Safety and Justice Affairs Committee. My name is Gary Daniels, and I'm the Chief Lobbyist for the ACLU of Ohio. I appear today to offer public comment on the planned adoption of automatic license plate readers throughout Cuyahoga County. The ACLU of Ohio is not anti-technology, and we fully understand the variety of benefits ALPRs can provide when attempting to track stolen vehicles, search for kidnapped victims, and various other legitimate law enforcement purposes. However, the same reasons ALPRs work so well for law enforcement are the same reasons they provide numerous and serious privacy concerns regarding their use. Before Cuyahoga County adopts this technology, we strongly urge you to address the following concerns. And general surveillance. If so desired, and without the proper regulations, data can be aggregated and ALPRs can be utilized by government and law enforcement to monitor and document where all of us travel throughout the county. Among the personal information that can easily be discovered are political affiliations, our religious beliefs, the medical, mental health, and substance abuse care we receive, whether or not we own guns, our sexual orientation, and so much more information many of us wish to remain private for data information sharing. Because this technology can capture so much information about our daily lives that has no relation to legitimate law enforcement purposes, the ACLU of Ohio is concerned how this data will be used, who will have access to it, and how long it will be retained. If the plan is to sell, share, or give this information to other government or private entities, our privacy concerns increase. Is it anticipated all this information will be shared with the federal government, such as the Department of Homeland Security or the Northeast Ohio Regional Fusion Center, for example? Such a plan would be opposed by the ACLU of Ohio, given our federal government's seemingly unquenchable appetite for all the information it can gather about us, no matter how otherwise mundane or unimportant. Does the county or its ALPR vendor plan to sell or share this data with other private vendors, entities, businesses, and more? The ACLU of Ohio can think of no legitimate purpose for such dissemination, and we strongly encourage Cuyahoga County to forbid such uses. Who will have access to this information within the county? All county law enforcement? All city law enforcement? Exactly which state and federal authorities? What regulations and restrictions will govern access? What penalties will there be for improper collection, use, or dissemination? Those living in and traveling through Cuyahoga County deserve to know how their privacy will or will not be protected. Is that the bell? All right. I've got two paragraphs, thank you. Under retention schedule, these concerns can be reduced if Cuyahoga County develops and uses a retention schedule to delete this unnecessary information as soon as possible. The longer it remains in the system, the more potential for abuse. This also benefits law enforcement and local governments, as they know very well the exorbitant financial costs of retaining hours upon hours of useless data. There's much more to be said about the ACLU of Ohio's opinions about automatic license plate readers. Accordingly, we will soon follow up with Cuyahoga County officials to expand upon our concerns and share additional information we hope will prove helpful. Until then, the ACLU of Ohio urges a thoughtful and deliberate process for the proper implementation of this invasive technology so law enforcement can utilize it in non-controversial ways and to give the public confidence automatic license plate readers are not violating their rights or being used to track their activities. If the public does not have that confidence, the use of this surveillance technology and others like it will continue to invite controversy and opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone further?
Reverend Pinckney?
Welcome, Reverend.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone in the room. And I have some guests with me today, too, that would like to address you all, and they're here for a first time. Please welcome them when they come. They don't know the process, so please make them feel at home. I want to, first of all, thank the person who just spoke up on behalf of the ACLU. However, I do want to pose a contradiction there because the ACLU refused to take complaints from me during my experience of domestic violence. And my complaints have been destroyed and overlooked, and I'm being violated and discriminated against because of the very factors that he did mention in his dissertation to you. Resolution 2015 and Resolution 2016 both address, as he did state, privacy components, but in my book that I authored and published called Choose Life, there was a city that privatized itself to death, and we don't want that for the county, the city, or our nation. And in my concern for both of these pieces, the emergency dispatch for not only Olmsted Township, but others that would be adjoined locally, statewide, and nationally, and the fixed automated license plate recognition. My concern with those is, just as there are false prophets and false teachers, and there are bad police officers, there are people who abuse the system. And I'm concerned about human trafficking, which in previous days would be known as the Pro-Slavery Amendment, the Corwin Amendment, the Ghost Amendment, and the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which makes us victims over and over again. And I'm also concerned about these law enforcement officers and people who work in these agencies that do bad things, abusing the system, using the judicial process to use kangaroo court, which I am a victim of currently. Unfortunately, we are in a position where we have to separate the wheat from the chaff, the good from the bad, but some more review needs to go into this, especially the mere fact that someone can actually come from the ACLU with my complaints on record for over 10 years, NAACP and other agencies, and this process has protected my abusers and has violated all of my rights. So please look into these entities. The human trafficking, also known as slavery, which is supposed to be abolished, which really is not, as well as kangaroo court and how they are used in these emergency dispatch processes. I called recently 911 and was violated, totally disrespected by a dispatch operator who wanted to argue with me about the safety of my grandchildren, my children, and myself. She decided to debate with me and refused to take the information down to find my grandchildren and my children.
Thank you.
So please, thank you very much.
Anyone further?
Yes, Mr. Corze?
Hi, my name is George Corze, and I know nothing about how any of this works. I ran into Reverend Pinckney while I was over at the Justice Center. I've had numerous experiences, none of them fond, well, I shouldn't say none, with our City of Cleveland Police Department. Most recently, a friend of mine, a homeless man, was arrested on an outstanding warrant who I've been helping for 6 months. He suffers from schizophrenia. I had him probated, got him back on his medications. He's gained 38 pounds, and for the last 4 months, he's been an outstanding person, and my kids know him, and they play with him, and he was arrested on an outstanding warrant, and I understand that he had a warrant from when he wasn't on his medications, and that was on Friday, and I was at the Justice Center seeing what I could do to get him out today. Right. I've called numerous times. I've spoken to numerous people just to try and get him his medications because I don't want him to slide backwards.
If I could, and I'll give you your time. The way we are set up, this is time for comment on what's on our agenda.
And I
It
understand
seems like a
that.
general, I'll let you finish, but next time you come, if you come, and you're more than welcome, you'd want to wait till the end if it doesn't
Very
have
good.
something to do with you.
I
But
understand.
continue.
I understand. I called and asked if there's a way I can bring him his medications because I don't want to see him backslide. The people on the phone over the last 4 days have been incredibly rude, not helpful, confrontational, and all I am is a man who's doing my best to help a man who has nobody pulling for him. The woman on the phone on Friday, or maybe it was Saturday morning, told me he had been to medical and that he had been administered his medications. Mm-hmm. He hasn't. It's been 3 days. I have 6 months of hard work put into this man, and I can't get any answers or any help. He is innocent until he is proven guilty, and he's being treated like an animal, and it's not acceptable on any level. And I don't know what can be done. I'm sure this is not the first time any of you are being made aware of this, but I can assure you nothing has been done, or I wouldn't be standing here today. I knew nothing about these proceedings, the Reverend Pinckney, anybody in this room, up until an hour and a half ago when I ran into her in the Justice Center and she heard me on the phone saying, "Why are you being so rude to me? All I'm trying to do is help this man." And when I got off the phone, she said, "You handled that very well. You need to follow me at 1 o'clock and tell them what you just told me." My time's up. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Anyone further?
No one else has signed in.
Okay. In your packet, we have the minutes of October 31st. If they're in order, I'll accept a motion. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Against? Thank you. Resolution 2017-0214.
Resolution number 2017-0214, adopting the Cuyahoga County 2017 to 2022 All Hazards Mitigation Plan.
Who is here to speak?
Good morning, Councilman Gallagher, Safety Council, Brandy Carney, Director of Public Safety and Justice Services.
Morning. Afternoon.
Afternoon, my bad. Excuse me, sorry about that. So I do have a brief presentation for both this item as well as the Olmsted Township dispatch item that's next on the agenda before the license plate readers. So to just give some background on the mitigation plan itself, I wanted to first just discuss the Office of Emergency Management. Emergency Management is one of the divisions in my department, the Department of Public Safety and Justice Services. Their role is to prepare, mitigate, respond, and recover from disasters. And I think it's important to note that we do work close daily with public safety professionals, businesses, governmental organizations, et cetera. But it's really important that when an emergency starts, most of our work has already been done. That pre-planning is what's being done every day in our office in order to alleviate some of the pressures when a true large emergency does happen. So here we'll find the four divisions within within emergency management. We do have plans, or write plans for both countywide plans as well as local individual safety plans with the safety forces. Write training and exercises with safety forces. We have operations, which includes our emergency operations center that we activate and operate out of during an emergency. And we also have a public information and outreach section. So the main guiding document through the Office of Emergency Management is our emergency operation plan. This particular plan serves as the template for a large response or any emergency incident. And what it allows for is that there's a coordinated response when there's lots of different agencies or a number of different cities coming together, that everyone's working from the same guiding document, and so everyone knows how to run the emergency so it runs smoothly. So what's on the agenda item today in front of you is the mitigation plan itself. This is a countywide plan that requires a 5-year strategy to reduce disaster losses. It is a requirement of the Federal Stafford Act. So how it works is we, the county, work with the municipalities and write this single plan countywide. We then provide a resolution to each of the municipalities and ask that they adopt our plan moving forward. So the mitigation plan itself, as I mentioned, it identifies all hazards and risks in the county for emergencies. It prioritizes those hazards, and it specifically cites ways that we can mitigate or reduce risk with those hazards. So one example would be consistent flooding in certain areas of Valley View. So within this particular plan, it cites those areas, and it cites a way to alleviate some of those flood risk would be to elevate homes. And so when they request grant dollars to elevate homes, they request them using the, or acknowledging the verbiage that's in our mitigation plan. So anytime that any local municipality wants state or federal mitigation funding, that project has to be reflected in our countywide mitigation plan. So that's why we work with all of them now to make sure it's reflected there. And I just happened to look in the system this morning, and over the last so many years, the Cuyahoga County area itself, just in mitigation dollars, has received over $5 million in mitigation funds from state and federal government. And then the final slide here, again, just to reiterate, FEMA does require this adoption every 5 years. To date, we have about a half of the municipalities that have returned their resolutions, and we're hoping to have all 59 by February of 18. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you guys have any.
Questions? Mr. Miller?
Do we actually have copies of the plan here, or can we see them online, or?
The plan is posted online, and I can make sure to also send it to you, Councilman. We do have it posted online. We also, it was a requirement that we had it online for public comment over the last year and for some community meetings. I don't have a physical copy, unfortunately.
We don't want to harm trees. If you could send it, if you could send the clerk an electronic version so it could be circulated around to us, that would be helpful.
Absolutely do that, sir.
The other question I had for you is that in our meetings of the Regional Transportation Subcommittee, one of the things that came up around public transportation was about public transportation's role in disaster planning, particularly in a kind of an event where a large-scale evacuation would be required, and we would need public transportation to evacuate people who don't have transportation, who are in hospitals, jails, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers, and other such places. And my question is how much discussion, planning, and coordination has there been between RTA and your office around such type of planning?
Sure, thank you. So we've had significant discussion. So we do have a evacuation plan. Also, as part of our emergency operation plan, the guiding document I referenced earlier, we follow the state and federal format, which includes 15 emergency support functions. So the very first emergency support function is transportation. So that requires us as the county to identify a primary agency. That agency is RTA, and secondary agencies or anyone else in the event of a disaster that would be able to provide transportation services. So RTA regularly coordinates with us, does exercises with us, sends someone to our EOC or the City of Cleveland's EOC to coordinate transportation services. They first can use their own buses and services, and then they would also coordinate with the secondary agencies that are referenced in our plan. So they are a primary agency that we work with.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Baker.
Thank you. How does the CERT, or I guess it's called the Community Emergency Response Team, how does that interplay with today's proposal?
Sure. So community emergency response teams are grassroots, for lack of a better word, teams. They're so valuable in the event of an emergency and, especially recovering from an emergency. They're usually local teams of volunteers that are coordinated through the local fire or the police departments. We have, the last few years, have been working towards possibly having a county CERT team, but that's not in place at this point. So where they would come specific to the mitigation plan is in recovering from a disaster. So again, often when, I'll use Valley View again, for example, we've been having to help clean out basements and following a flood. Their local CERT team was incredibly valuable, going door to door, finding out what the needs of the local residents are, showing up, helping people clean out their basement. So they really just, are able to help whenever needed for an emergency and provide that local support.
If I may, in our district, CERT is pretty strong, and they are considered the first response.
Excuse me, Council, can you turn your microphone, please?
It's just not working. Is this better? Yes. Okay, turn that one off. So I was just saying that in our district, CERT is very strong, and they have even exercises throughout the years. They coordinate different disasters. They were at different shopping centers and things of what could possibly happen. So I guess it just looks like there's certainly you can connect the dots here. When there's a disaster, this would be maybe one of the first group of people that are right there on the ground, grassroots, that are trained and ready to be engaged with the hazards mitigation plan. So I'm asking, even beyond the helping after the fact, how do they interact with this plan even at the onset of the disaster?
Sure.
Are they part of the plan?
Sure, it's always a local resource, and I'm very familiar with West Side CERT. They've always been very active. So that's something that usually, again, the local police or fire chief or mayor would call on their local CERT team, get them immediately involved, see what resources or support they could provide. If let's say the emergency might have gotten larger or grown, they might reach out to the county for other coordinating or for resources. But to have that immediate availability to call on people to help out is really a great tool that a lot of these cities have and some don't. In my emergency management office, in that office, we do have one individual that works with all the local CERT teams. And so they get together, they do some coordination together, some credentialing to make sure that there is some consistency, although they still are a local resource.
Thank you.
You mentioned they have to return your inquiry by February,
We've asked the resolutions that they be adopted. Our target date is February of 18.
and if they don't, do they put themselves in jeopardy of receiving any funds?
I think we did this 5 years ago, and I remember there were 2 cities that hadn't, and we called and, within a couple days we're able to get those. But again, if they aren't in the plan, or if they don't adopt ours and emergency happens or grant dollars become available, they wouldn't be able to be a recipient unless they have their own plan on file.
Okay. Is there anything further? So what are your wishes with this?
Just to move forward, passing the resolution for the mitigation plan for Cuyahoga County.
Is there a necessity, an emergency, or can we do 3?
I
Our
think
third
we can do
reading
3,
would
sir.
be in December.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
If everyone's okay with that, I'll accept a motion for Resolution 2017-0214 to the full council for second reading.
So move.
All in favor? Against? Thank you. 2017-0215.
Resolution number 2017-0215, authorizing a revenue-generating agreement with Olmsted Township in the amount not to exceed $555,000 for Cuyahoga Emergency Communication System emergency dispatch services for the period 10/31/2017 to 10/30/2020.
Yes, ma'am.
So good afternoon again, Brandy Carney, Cuyahoga County Department of Public Safety and Justice Services. I do have a couple slides here. This particular agreement is a new 3-year agreement for Olmsted Township Dispatch. We did just complete a 3-year agreement with them also. And I want to acknowledge Chief Matt Banyo, who is the police chief that is in the audience today also. Sorry. So the first slide, I just wanted to reiterate some of the other services that CCOEMS does provide. If you remember, CCOEMS is the county 911 dispatch center. Any person who dials 911 from a cell phone anywhere in Cuyahoga County except for the city of Cleveland, that call will first go to CCOEMS to answer. And they operate in the building of Bedford Hospital. Here's some just additional services that CCOEMS does provide. Again, noting we went live countywide with text to 911 in June of 17. So the Olmsted Township in 2014, CCOEMS began providing dispatch services. So we answer all police, fire, EMS, emergency calls, both cell phone and landline now for Olmsted Township. Here's just some background information on Olmsted Township, the police department, the fire department, and some of the equipment that they have. Some of their incident activity, 2014 numbers are low because we did start at the very end of the year when we first started the 3-year contract. Their calls for service have obviously increased every year. And for example, their police calls are already at almost 10,500 for this year alone. So this is specific to the contracts in front of you today, Council. It is for CCOEMS to answer all of the calls or continue to provide dispatch for Olmsted Township. We also provide nationally accredited training to our CCOEMS staff. That staff is made up of 9 call takers and 8 dispatchers. And I also have a supervisor that's on every shift and that stays on the floor for that shift. The current contract includes $185,000 annually for 3 years that we will receive for Olmsted Township to provide this service. And then we also have some of the additional services as part of the contract, including we complete a quality assistance working group, for example, with Olmsted Township to make sure we continue to stay on the same page every month. Finally, moving forward, I just wanted to again put out there that CCOEMS does, the intention is to continue to expand dispatch services. We're actively involved right now with talking to the sheriff about their dispatch and their electronic monitoring unit. So CCOEMS possibly providing those services, as well as a few other agencies and municipalities that we've reached out to and started discussions to offer up dispatch services to. So again, this is a renewal agreement. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Questions? Seeing none. Just want to thank you, Ms. Carney was at the forefront of consolidation in this area. It wasn't very easy at the beginning, and you got us through it, and I thank you for your dedication, the stick-to-itiveness to get us to where we're at. I would assume, Chief, we're okay with the service provided? Yes, sir. Very good. I would assume, looking at the dates, we would want to move on this on an emergency basis due to the shortness of time.
Please, sir.
If everyone's okay with that, I'll accept the motion for Resolution 2017-0215 to the full council for a second reading. Suspension under emergency. All in favor? Against? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
217-0216.
Resolution number 2017-0216, making an award on requisition number 40136 to Celex ES in the amount not to exceed $870,338 for the fixed automated license plate recognition project for the period 12/1/2017 to 6/30/2021.
Thank you. Who do we have with you today?
Councilman Gallagher, thank you. Brandy Carney, Director of Public Safety, Justice Services. I do have a presentation specifically about the contract in front of you and how the technology works and to address some concerns. And I also have some chiefs that I wanted to come up after I complete. One of the commanders in the audience does have somewhere to go, so I wanted to know if it's okay if we bring him up here to say a few things. So it's Commander Harold Bertel from Cleveland, and he's in charge of Bureau of Homeland Services for Cleveland Police.
Welcome,
Good afternoon.
Commander.
Thank you. Commander Harold Patel, Cleveland Division of Police, Bureau of Homeland Services. I'm here just to give you a quick overview of the license plate reader project. I was the initial lead in 2009 when we purchased the initial 38 units through UASC and some other funding. That was quite a process. As people mentioned earlier, there's a lot of challenges with it, and there's some concerns, and you have to address those before you purchase these. So we looked at this technology, and I'm glad to see the Councilwoman mention the term connect the dots, which is a term that President Bush coined after 9/11. However, this is one of the resources that allows us to connect the dots, not only on the counterterrorism side, but also on the crime side. The biggest value for license plate readers is the database. And that obviously is something that we have to balance with the need and the responsibility for civil rights, civil liberties. That database, key to its existence is how it's managed, what's entered into it, who has access, and obviously the retention period. The retention period is something that we should all come together and agree on what the number is. That number is quite fluid nationwide. State of New York, it is indefinite. On the West Coast, they do 2 years. Some places do 1 year. Cincinnati is about a year. Some places do 9 months. So it's up to us to determine what that is. And I know that Director Carney has spearheaded that discussion and looking at some best legislative practices for the retention period. But I just want to mention the collection of those license plates, and that's all it is. It's just a collection of a license plate and a snapshot of the vehicle is invaluable to investigators who are looking at a crime to, number one, plot movement, which will credit or discredit a particular suspect's information or alibi, let's say, or to determine, there is a certain pattern here. Let's say, as an example, if we have license plate readers strategically located, maybe we have mobile ones on cars. This project is specifically for fixed locations. So we know that there is, and the program does allow for detection and analysis of certain patterns and certain trends. Why is it that every day, Tuesday at 10:25, this car drives by and exactly 6 minutes later, a secondary car goes by? Well, that specific vehicle, why is that? Why is it that every Friday evening we see these 2 or 3 vehicles caravanning here? It could just be friends going to dinner every Friday night, if ever could be. But oftentimes, those kinds of analysis lead to discovery of other crimes. So that's certainly what I want to mention. The biggest value is in the collection. It is our responsibility, and I'm sure that Director Carney has talked to all the chiefs involved here, that not just anyone can look at this data. This data is for investigative use only. Investigative use for crimes or counterterrorism efforts in our region and certainly beyond, because we do get requests from outside of the region for their follow-up investigations also, as we can call Detroit and say, hey, we're looking at Ohio license plate ABC 123. Can you please let us know if that vehicle was there? Yes, it was. He went to the casino. Why do we know that? Because on the human intelligence side, on the counterterrorism intelligence world, we probably have an idea that this individual is going to be there. We need to confirm that. Maybe it's a violation of parole and some other issues, investigative reasons that we look at those things. So certainly the value is there. And it's also going to supplement a already existing system in our region. When we purchased those initial units in 2009, City of Cleveland kept 7 of those units, and then we pushed the rest out throughout the region, not just the county, the region. All that is going to go into one database. That database is the value to the entire region. The region is 5 counties: Lorain, Cuyahoga, Lake, Cuyahoga, and Ashtabula County. All those counties contribute to the database and also benefit from that, which really pushes our safety out further, so. those are my
Commander, you're probably, and I'm trying to get a fix on retention time. Do you have a best guess as what you would consider the best time period to keep?
1 year is a good, the reason is, in New York, when we had the attack of 9/11, they proved, and that's why citizens of the state of New York have elected to go with indefinite. And New York is the number one terrorism target in the world, but there were some movements by some actors in the 1996 attack. Had they collected, and this was on no one's radar, had they collected that information, and they could have leveraged that information to potentially mitigate or revert 9/11. So that's where that whole argument comes for indefinite. We're not saying that here. We think a year is a good time unless there's reason to. If there are certain files in there, if Ohio ABC 123 is involved in an active investigation, maybe we should retain that for investigative purposes. Everyone else, you and I driving by, going to the game, going to dinner, that should be purged at the year mark.
1 year.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So again, I have a few slides here, and then if you guys have any additional questions also for the chiefs in the audience, we can
And,
bring them up.
and you were here when you heard the concerns earlier. If you can just take us from A to Z and touch on as much as you can, the concern we spoke last week about the time retention and what would be operable, and where it's going to be retained, who's going to retain it, who has access, all the things that we had heard about, and we'll take our time going through it.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
I did address those here. I just have a few slides, and then I'm happy to go
Okay.
into.
Take your time.
Sorry about that. So again, the fixed license plate reader program specifically for the fixed, as Director or Commander Pertella just spoke about. It's been approximately a year-long collaborative. We have about 20 law enforcement agencies, and we have been meeting about once a month to discuss this project and move forward, along with project support from Department of Public Safety. So just sometimes when we talk about this, I want to make sure that we understand, even physically what the system is. So it's just on poles would be a camera, something like this in particular parts. Usually they would be right on the lighting, and they would have a camera that takes a picture of every car that goes by, and it sends that back to a database, and that's stored. It's usually, to Councilwoman Baker's question yesterday when we spoke, it's usually some parts of the car you can see from the license plate. It depends on the speed of the car, but usually they try and at least get the license plate in some version of the car in the visual. So the benefits of the license plate system, again, as said, that law enforcement is able to upload a hot list, for example. So a list of suspects for terrorism or suspects for a certain type of crime or an Amber Alert. You upload that into the system. If one of those license plate then goes by, the local officer could get notified in his vehicle, or the local dispatch center could get notified and know that car was passing by. And detectives are also able to go into the system and query the system for investigative purposes. As mentioned, there are currently 38 mobile units in our region already. So those have been live since 2010. They are not fixed on poles. They are actually wired on police cars currently throughout the region. So again, a 5-county region, and there's 38 mobiles that are already in use. Last year alone, there was about 5 million hits that they have for the mobile units in the region when we queried the database. Excuse me, it was over 4 million reads. I apologize, 4 million. So the funding for the fixed license plate reader project that's in front of you, $750,000 is from Homeland Security grant funding, and another $120,000 is from Public Safety General Fund. I also made a request and received $500,000 for future grant funding to continue to expand the program, both the mobile and fixed units. And the exact number of those will go back to the chiefs and discuss with them based on need. So just some background on a site selection. Approximately a year ago, I sent out an email to all the chiefs in the county. At that point in time, 20 of them responded saying they were interested in participating. Based on the amount of funding that we received, we knew that we could at least give everybody one of the locations that requested. Some requested multiple locations, and we weren't able to do that with this first round. So what that means is for this contract, it's 20 locations, and it'll be approximately 72 cameras, because again, they do get 2 lanes of traffic at each one of those areas. So something such as Ontario, which is right here by Jacobs Field, correct? Progressive Field, I apologize. It's multiple lanes, so you need more than just the 2 cameras or one going each way. Again, this is just a map showing where throughout the county. It's actually kind of a nice spread throughout the county that we're requesting that these fixed units be. And these are the actual intersections that are proposed. And again, these all came from local law enforcement agencies. We did use some criteria. We looked at the amount of traffic, some crime, counterterrorism rates for each of the particular areas, especially if a city submitted more than one site. So for the RFP itself that was issued, we received 7 responses. LSEG, which is the vendor that we're making the recommendation for, was actually the second vendor. We initially negotiated with the number 1 vendor and weren't able to agree to terms. It's also important to note that LSEG, this vendor, is also the vendor we're currently using for the mobile data terminals. So we'll have the same system, the same vendor that'll be used. So to speak to some of the concerns that were raised earlier, just in Ohio alone, here's some numbers on the units and the other regional areas that also have both fixed and mobile units. You can see most of the big cities, Ohio Highway Patrol. We actually went down, myself, Mr. McNay and Mr. Tay from my office went down to Cincinnati. If I remember, they have a 13-county region, lots of fixed license plate readers, lots of mobiles down there. So they've been doing this for quite this time, and so we did kind of kick off our project there. But knowing that most people throughout Ohio, the large cities, are already in use using this technology. So to address some of the data safeguards, Councilman, we have met with this committee and have discussed the retention period. There has been discussion around a 1-year retention, but we are continuing to work with the law department on a memorandum of understanding that will be required for each of the agencies to sign off on that participate in the program, because they will be receiving equipment from us. So we will be working through that. Also, the system itself, not anybody can just query the system. So they have to have permission rights again. So law enforcement, public safety professionals will be the only ones with rights or permission. The system also audits who's in there. So if we went back and there was a question of concern that came up, you'd be able to see who went in there and the particular type of search that they completed. And so there is that tracking mechanism. So we are not requesting an indefinite hold of the information, and the system itself does have those safeguards in place. So our timeline to move forward with this project, if we're able to move forward with the contract, would be to start the installation of the cameras in January of this year, and that would be completed in June of next year. And then after that, we'd complete the 3-year contract for maintenance and warranty with the vendor. And then just a final slide. We'd like to see regional expansion of the program, possibly with the grant money I already have coming this year. There's also an opportunity to work with, private entities or other local entities. Again, law enforcement would only have access to the data, but outside of their particular business, if that was something that they would be interested in. So having conversations with them moving forward. So I'm able to answer any questions you might have, or Chief from Fairview Park, Eric Upperman, I think he's been questioned a number of times this week and has provided some good feedback if you're interested in having him come up.
You showed other cities in Ohio. What are their retention times? Do we know that?
So I know Cincinnati's, the region itself, not just the city itself, is 1 year. We did make the request, I asked on Friday for highway patrol, and I did not receive a response yet. Be happy when I collect that information, but as the commander said, I usually find it's around a year. That seems to be common for this type of technology.
Okay. And also you said that when the mobile units go down, they get a hit. What constitutes a hit? What are they looking for?
So it was actually, I used the word hit, I apologize, it was reads. So the reads are just them passing any license plate and capturing that license plate. So it would just be the number that they captured last year.
What sets it off? What says, okay, this is a license plate we're looking for?
That would be a list that either the law enforcement or public safety uploads into the system. So there's an Amber Alert. We put that license plate into the system, and then when that car goes by, a hit goes and notifies local dispatch or an officer. Otherwise, if there's not an actual plate in there that's a hit, that picture is just stored in the system until an investigator looks in there for, a specific investigation, or it's just copied over sooner or later because of the retention policy.
Okay. And we don't have retention policy in here as far as timeline. I didn't see that.
We currently have for our mobile camera units, again, that have been live since 2010, we have a 1-year retention policy. That's been the discussion in the users group with the chief that we've had. I just don't want to 100% commit because it's kind of a group effort that we're moving forward, and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page there.
And where are we at with this? 1 year?
Yes, that's where we're discussing now.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right, wow. Very interesting. I guess maybe run through a couple of things. I think as we discussed earlier, the license that's being captured is only what's being captured. There's no pictures of people in the car. If the car was stopped for whatever reason near where do we begin and end with the picture? Is it just the license?
So there usually is, you can see the car. I'm gonna.
Dan Grine, I'm the Director of IT for Chagrin Valley Dispatch. I helped with the project, putting this process together and what have you, and I'm a retired police officer from the city of Beechwood. After 30 years in law enforcement, I am currently a part-time police officer of Orange Village, so I have substantial knowledge in this. Typically, a license plate reader, once it scans a plate, the camera itself will take a picture of the plate because it reads it, so it'll be an up-close picture, and then there'll be another picture that's taken back, so you can pick up, say, the rear portion of the car. You do not get to see inside the car for any occupants unless perhaps it's a small car when there's somebody sitting in the back seat, and it's just by faith that you're able to see them through there, but that's very unlikely. It's typically the rear of the car, so you get enough to see that it was a Chevy Trailblazer or some other type of car. You get some quality pictures in that regard, but no occupants. As far as the vehicle, where it's been or what have you, we are able to track the vehicle when it's scanned, where it's sitting in front of. If an officer in a mobile camera drives by, then they would have that, but they would have to go back and look at the picture or the GPS location and determine if they were in front of a business or whatnot.
All right. And I guess maybe I would continue to ask you, given that you have the scope of hands-on, when you're talking in you too, Brandy, when you're talking in your big picture of how you're going to develop this, how do you determine, and this is probably the number one question I get asked, how do you determine how a free society, one that is able to be out there and walking and doing all the things that they do as honest, law-abiding people, versus that random act of violence that they may be victim to, that you would hope would be a camera somewhere nearby that would be able to capture who that person was. So how do you in your discussions know where to draw the line that gives protection to those that are law-abiding people thinking that they're in a free society that is not being watched every minute when they decide to go outside and do something in their yard or go down to the local grocery store and not feel like they're being watched. How do you balance that?
That's a good philosophical question. So this project is really looking at one element, and that is license plates. That's all we're interested in, scanning plates so we can do, as Commander Patel said, data mining for investigation purposes. The gentleman that was up earlier talked about, sharing the information, who's going to get the information shared with. It's only law enforcement. As managing the database now, I see who has access, and we control who has access to it and whatnot. It is strictly law enforcement. And typically the officer will come back to the database and look up for something that's happened for a crime. There's so many records in there, if somebody just scrolling through it or looking or whatnot, that isn't likely to happen. In my entire law enforcement career, I've never had the FBI come to me and ask for a data dump of any size whatsoever. So I don't know where that comes from. I'm not saying they don't do that, but in this area and in my involvement, they've never done that. The cameras, there's cameras all over, as you know. Businesses have cameras and things of that nature. So typically when there's a crime, it's almost always after the fact, unfortunately. We go back as law enforcement, we look at the video, or we find a business that's nearby, they happen to have video, and then we retrieve it from there. There is no area, a group in this area that I'm aware of that sits there and actively monitors cameras. And in our dispatch center, we have hundreds of cameras, and it's impossible to sit there and monitor those cameras nonstop. It's typically after the fact, or there's some event going on and you purposely go to that camera to pull it up.
If I may just, I understand that it's only law enforcement that has access to this, which of course is how it should be. But in perhaps a higher level crime, Amber's Alert, perhaps some type of terror act, you have the media that will, I'm sure, give you a call or want to investigate because you have access to more information than we ever did before. What are your policies in place for dealing with media asks or family asks or other information that may be asked of your team? What policies do you have in place that really safeguards that information?
So that's an excellent question, Councilwoman. We are working with the law department now to make sure that there is discussion on public records and in case we do get those requests. And so it's not information that's constantly giving out there. So that is something we have started discussions with the law, with the law department. I'd be happy to come back and update you even at the next reading if you'd like on this.
If I may follow, before this is implemented, will the question of how long will it be retained and media inquiries, things like that, will that all be answered by then?
Absolutely. Again, we've been actively working for approximately a year. This contract happened to move forward, but we're very close. But absolutely, prior to it being implemented, that would be in place. Because in order for any of the cities to receive the equipment, they have to have the understanding of the system itself.
Good. Just one other question right now on the funding. The $750,000 is coming from the federal government. Was there a match or some percentage that the county or city or whoever was asking for this funding had to also include? Or was the total amount what was needed? And so the $120,000 of the general fund is something that we determined was needed in order to do this project?
So there was no match money required for this type of Homeland Security money. It was the reason for the $120,000 from my department was, again, we made the request out to all the chiefs, and this ensured that everybody got at least one in their community that requested and at least 2 lanes. And so it was the amount of money needed for the contract terms.
Term I need. And the money part of it, the $500,000 that you were able to get, which is, congratulations on that. I know that's hard to get. Is that too something where, are you targeting a certain program that will be used for, that in addition you'll have to also add more of our general fund money to it? Or are we in the bigger picture of things, and these are now just extras that perhaps would enhance what we're doing?
You know, I can't say specifically, but the 500,000 was again to add additional mobile units or fixed units in the future, and it does not require that any additional general fund money be put towards it.
And maybe my last question, the reading of the license, there's been some speculation that this could be speeding, that if you find someone that's going through your scan and they were going 70 miles in a 50, can this be used for any type of traffic ticket or
This
along those
project and
lines.
this technology, no.
no?
No.
And your cars that are also installed with the 38, has that ever been used to find speeders or?
No, this technology does not determine the speed of vehicles. The officer typically uses a radar unit, so it just simply reads the plate, records the plate, and the date and time. And that's all.
Thank you, Chair.
So policy right now is 1-year retention,
Yes, that has been the discussion.
and this will follow that policy?
Correct, that has been the discussion with the group. It hasn't been 100% confirmed, but within the next month, we will probably have the group meet one more time, but we have been discussing 1 year.
Because I want to really kind of tighten this up before we move it. I'm looking at our schedule, and I have dates on here of December 1st. Our last meeting in December is the 12th.
If we could request second reading the 12th, and I can make sure to convene the group, and we can bring forward the retention policy then. If that works for you, I'd be happy.
Why don't we do this? We'll move it to the next meeting. Which will be
Be November 28th.
28th. We'll return it to this committee for a hearing, final hearing on the 5th, and move it to the final meeting in December on the 12th, if everything is copacetic. Is that okay with you? Or is there a time situation on the money, or I'm just concerned about locking down the policy and having this thing wrapped up properly and then moving it on.
We have a draft policy that is draft almost completed. Again, I just want to convene the group to confirm that the 1 year, the rest of the policy is already written, it's already been discussed with the group.
Yes, ma'am.
If I may also, it looked that you weren't quite there for the policy on public records requests with legal.
Law department.
If we could have that also, I think that's an important piece to give comfort to those out there that what your policies are when it comes to requesting information.
Is that timeline okay with you?
My only concern is the $120,000 is on 17's budget, just to make sure that we can encumber that, but I can follow up after this meeting to see, so it's not a problem. That's my concern, but we should be okay as long as it's the next meeting we talk.
Well, and that's based on December 1st, so, we would get this in and out if everything is proper on the 12th.
We
As long
should
as
be
you get
okay.
back to me today to make sure that there's no dollars involved that are in jeopardy.
That would be great.
And if not, that's what we'll do. We'll move it to the full council, back to committee to finalize this. We'll amend it as needed with that policy. And anything else anyone can think of that they're going to be concerned with, we want to wrap that up and move it out to the final meeting on the 12th. Is
Perfect.
that good
That's
with
good with me.
everybody?
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I'm fine with that. I'm glad that you made that, we've been able to work this out. I was hoping that we wouldn't move this out today because I didn't want to, I didn't have enough information about it and to support it today. And so my vote today would have been a no on this. And I was able to hear some of the information in the back as you were presenting. And I think for me to be comfortable, seeing that the policy, once it's fully put together, will be very helpful. Anything I think of, I would be sure to forward to you and the clerk so we can get it to the department for any
Certainly.
answers.
Any questions to Mrs. Carney, and that would be beneficial to everyone. CC the committee, go through Janine. That will be helpful as long as we're all on the same page, looking at the same questions. I'm certain some will be the same. Yes, ma'am.
Chair, may we have a copy of your overview, your presentation today?
Absolutely.
Okay, if everything's okay with that, we'll move Resolution 2017-0216 to the full council for second reading with the understanding it will come back to committee on the 5th for final passage, third reading on the 12th. Do I have a motion in that regard? Second? All in favor?
Just,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman, discussion. So, just make sure I'm clear. So the next meeting date, we're just passing out of committee for purpose of continued discussion.
So for the, I want to read it because of the timeline. I want to get it out of committee, get the read in, bring it back,
And we'll come back, so we'll come back.
finalize, we'll
Okay.
come back committee. We'll finalize whatever, we'll amend what we have to amend, because I'm assuming we're going to have amendments here. We'll amend what we have to amend, and that will be our final product to go to third reading on the 12th.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I'd like for us to, as best we can, address the concerns we've heard from ACLU and just calls I've received from folks who live within the community. Just some of the things, we've been hearing about the other projects. So locking down that policy, and as soon as we have that, I'd like to see that. Well, I believe the committee chair said it will forward it through the clerk. And so I'm fine with supporting and moving it out of committee for second reading.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for accommodating us, Brandy. Is there anyone else? You wanted to bring someone up, Mrs. Carney? Did you want to bring someone up? I thought you said you wanted to. We're good? Thank you, everyone, for coming. We greatly appreciate it. Hopefully, we can have a finished product on the 12th of December so we can make our communities safer. Thank you.